The paper plate still sat there. A half-eaten sugar cookie shaped like a star, crumbled at the edge, next to a Christmas mug that had long gone cold. They knew I was here. They knew I'd made the cider, lit the tiny tree in the corner, put on the same sweater I wore every Christmas Eve. Still no one came. The silence pressed against the walls like snowfall, soft, but heavy. They knew I was here, and they still left me in the dark. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Comment below. The house hasn't changed much in 50 years. Same creaking floorboards that whispered under bare feet in the winter. Same faded wallpaper with the tiny blue roses. Peeling at the corners now, sure, but still hanging on. Even the smell stayed, cinnamon, old pine, and the soft powder of time. It was my husband, Martin, who built this place. Back in '72, when we barely had 2 nickels and a borrowed hammer. He laid every plank of that front porch with his own calloused hands, muttering about doing it right the first time. I painted the shutters green that spring, and every spring after, until my niece started asking questions I didn't have answers to. We raised both our children here, Ethan and Molly. Back when they still needed me. Back when they'd burst through the front door with scraped knees and science projects, and shout, "Mom, guess what?" before even setting down their bags. I remember the chaos. Mornings with burnt toast, lunchboxes packed with peanut butter sandwiches and napkins I wrote notes on. Evenings with frozen pizza and last-minute book reports. And always, always Christmas. That was my season. Martin used to string the lights before the first frost, and I'd spend days planning the meal. Stuffing, roast, pies lined up like soldiers on the countertop. The kids helped too, once they were old enough. Molly loved making place cards. Ethan liked sneaking spoonfuls of the cranberry sauce. Even when Martin passed, 8 years ago now, God rest him, I kept the traditions going. Not for me. For them. For the family. They promised to keep coming. They said it after the funeral. Said, "We'll always come home, Mom. This is home." I believed them. The first few years they did. The house still echoed with laughter, grandkids dragging wrapping paper down the hallway, Ethan teasing his sister, Molly bringing her famous caramel cake. I was happy just watching. The keeper of memories, the one who remembered everyone's favorite side dish. But slowly, quietly, they started slipping away. Last year, Molly said they were traveling for the holidays. Something different this year, Mom. Ethan had a sick dog, or maybe a work deadline. I can't quite remember. I told them. It's all right. But I made the pies anyway. I still wrapped little gifts. Just in case. This year, they told me ahead of time. Said they were all going to a cabin in Vermont. Didn't even invite me. Molly said, "It's just going to be a lot of outdoor stuff, Mom. You know, not really your thing." And Ethan said, "We'll video call. It'll be like we're there." I smiled on the phone. Said, "Of course, honey." Hung up. Stared at the pie recipe in my lap until the words blurred. But I still cleaned the house. Dusted the picture frames, the one of Martin in his overalls, laughing with his whole face. Put new candles in the windows. Ironed the red tablecloth. Set the table with the good plates. The ones from our wedding registry, used only on Christmas Eve. I baked 2 pies. 1 apple, 1 pecan. Wrapped 3 small gifts, a scarf for Molly, gloves for Ethan. A book for the youngest grandchild. They're all under the tiny tree in the corner of the living room, just like always. And I sat here. In the same spot I always do. On the same couch where Martin used to sit, rubbing my feet after long days. I lit the fireplace. I put on the Christmas music, the old records that still skip a little on track 3. I even wore the sweater. The one with the tiny red bells stitched along the sleeves. Martin always said it made me look like the Queen of Christmas. But no one came. No knock on the door. No voices in the driveway. Just me, and the snow tapping the windows like a soft reminder. I thought maybe Ethan would change his mind. Maybe he'd feel a tug in his heart and come by with the kids, if only for a few minutes. But the hours passed. The cider cooled. And my heart, well, it stayed warm. But it hurt. Because I wasn't asking for much. Just a little space in their lives. Just one night to remember where they came from. The house is still full of memories, but now they echo. They bounce off empty walls and land in silence. I don't need pity. I don't need attention. But tonight, sitting here, with the tree lights flickering and the fire humming low, I realize something. They're not coming back. Not like they used to. Maybe they think I'm fine. Maybe they think love can be scheduled, sent in group texts, replaced with gifts mailed late. But I remember when love meant showing up. When it meant muddy boots in the hallway and coats tossed on the stair rail. When it meant carrying pie dishes back home with crumbs still inside. That's what I gave them. Year after year. Quiet, constant love. And now, it's just me. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to remember myself too. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about being slowly left behind. You don't notice the distance until you're squinting across it. The first time I felt it was subtle. A moment so quiet it could have passed for nothing. It was Thanksgiving 2 years ago. They had asked me to come to Molly's house instead of hosting at mine. Said it'd be easier, that I shouldn't stress myself. I nodded, folded up my apron, and went. I brought my pecan pie, the one they all used to fight over. I still remember Ethan as a boy, scraping the pan with his spoon, begging for just one more slice. But that day at Molly's house, it stayed untouched at the end of the table. Store-bought pumpkin pie sat in its place, with a plastic lid and a paper label that read fresh from the bakery. I smiled anyway. I asked if anyone wanted coffee afterward. I'd even brought my old percolator. Molly laughed gently, looked at her husband and said, "Oh Mom, we've got the Keurig now." I nodded again, sat down, folded my hands. There was no malice, just absence. A hollowing out of all the little things that used to feel like home. And it kept happening. Phone calls became shorter. Text messages more polite than personal. I'd send photos of the garden or my knitting, and they'd reply days later with a thumbs-up emoji. At Molly's birthday last spring, I brought a hand-stitched shawl, lilac and soft blue, her favorite colors. She thanked me, then left it in the box all afternoon. Later, I found it draped over a chair, forgotten. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being sensitive. Old age makes the mind heavy with doubt, and I didn't want to believe the worst. But the moments piled up. Ethan visited once in the summer, just him without the kids. He sat on the edge of the couch like he was in a hurry. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe it's time to talk about some kind of senior community. You know, with more support." I asked softly, "Support for what?" He didn't have an answer. Just rubbed the back of his neck and said, "You shouldn't be all alone out here, Mom." Out here. The house Martin built. The garden I'd kept blooming for 5 decades. The table that fed 3 generations. Suddenly it was out here. I wanted to ask him where here ended and there began. But I said nothing. That fall they stopped telling me about the grandkids' school events. I found out from a neighbor that Molly's youngest had won an art contest. I used to be the first to know those things. They forgot my birthday this year. I sat by the window all morning, trying not to expect anything, but hope is a stubborn guest. By evening, I baked myself a small cake. Just enough for one. A card arrived 2 days later. No handwriting, just printed text and their names signed at the bottom. No love. Just names. I kept that card tucked in the kitchen drawer for a while. Not because it meant something, but because it didn't. Even the house started to feel it. Rooms that once breathed with laughter now held their breath. The walls didn't echo anymore. They just listened. My photos on the mantel stood still in their dusty frames, watching as the space between us grew. And yet, I never said a word. I still crocheted gifts in December. Still sent out holiday cards. Still asked if I could bring something, if anyone needed help, if they were warm enough. I still played the part. Because maybe, deep down, I thought if I just kept showing up, they would too. But the truth crept in slowly. In skipped visits. In polite excuses. In how my voice seemed to fall to the bottom of every conversation. They didn't mean to leave me behind. But they did. Not all at once, just in pieces. Like packing away ornaments after Christmas. One memory at a time, tucked in boxes they might never open again. And me? I became the box in the attic. Still full of meaning, but too much trouble to bring down. It was around 8:30 when I realized no one was coming. The fire had burned low in the hearth, just red coals now, glowing soft and tired, like old eyes too weary to cry. Outside, the snow kept falling in hushes, covering the footprints I'd left on the porch when I brought in the mail earlier. Just junk mail, mostly. Catalogs. One small envelope with a charity request. No cards. No invitations. I stood up slowly, joints creaking like the floor beneath me, and walked to the tree. It wasn't much. A tiny thing I'd bought at the pharmacy last year. Just enough to feel like Christmas. I'd strung it with little red bows, clipped some candy canes to the branches, even added a few of Martin's old fishing lures, shiny ones for sparkle. At the base were the 3 gifts I'd wrapped weeks ago. Still neat. Still untouched. I picked up the scarf Molly's, ran my hand over the soft wool. It was the last yarn I bought with my own Social Security money this fall. Carefully chosen. Carefully stitched. And now left behind. I sat back down, resting the gift in my lap like a sleeping child. And in that moment, something shifted. Not with anger. Not even with sadness. But with clarity. A long, slow kind of knowing. They didn't forget me. They left me. On purpose, maybe not. But the result was the same. They knew where I was. They knew what this night meant to me. They knew I had made cider, lit candles, worn that silly sweater. And they chose something else. Cabins. Trips. Convenience. A different kind of joy. One where I didn't fit. I could have made excuses. God knows I had before. They're just busy. They don't realize how it feels. They'll come around. But something inside me, something quiet and firm, said no more. Because love shouldn't have to beg. It shouldn't knock on doors that never open. It shouldn't sit in silence hoping for the sound of tires on gravel, long after the clock strikes 9. I stood again, slower this time, and made my way to the back room. It was Martin's study once, now more of a memory box with walls. Dust hung in the air like breath. The desk sat against the far wall, his old lamp still there, the bulb dim but warm. I opened the bottom drawer. There it was. The envelope. Thick. Yellowed with age. My name written across the front in Martin's hand. Inside the house deed. Still in my name. Only my name. He had insisted, after his first health scare. Said he wanted me to have control. Said, just in case they ever forget who built this place with you. I remember laughing then. They'll never forget. I'd told him. His eyes had gone soft, the kind of soft that comes from knowing something you hope never comes true. I held the paper close, my fingers tracing the lines like braille, as if the past could speak through them. This house wasn't just wood and nails. It was the years I gave, the meals I cooked, the stories I told, the lullabies I hummed. It was the place where I buried my youth and found my strength. And I'd nearly let them take it from me, not with force, but with absence. I stood in that quiet room, my breath steady. I wasn't angry. I wasn't planning revenge. I didn't want to punish anyone. I just wanted to stop disappearing. To stop shrinking myself into something easier to forget. I folded the deed gently, returned it to the envelope, and placed it under my arm like a precious gift. Then I walked to the window. Snow still falling. Still soft. But now it didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. It felt like a beginning. And in the reflection of the glass, I saw myself. Older, yes. Alone maybe. But not broken. Not anymore. That night I didn't cry. I poured the cold cider down the sink. I blew out the candles. I unplugged the tree lights. And I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of warm milk, holding that envelope like a lifeline. And I thought, they left me on Christmas Eve. So maybe it's time I leave something too. Not in bitterness, but in quiet, certain grace. Because the heart may ache, but it remembers how to rise. Morning came soft and silver. The kind of winter light that doesn't warm the skin, but gently nudges the soul awake. I hadn't slept much. Not from sadness this time, but something quieter, more awake than I'd felt in years. There's a stillness that comes after the breaking. Not the silence of giving up, but the silence of knowing. I boiled water for tea instead of coffee. Martin always loved the smell of strong coffee in the morning, but after he passed, it started tasting more like memory than comfort. So tea it was. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where birthday candles had been blown out, where report cards were opened, where Martin once polished his boots while I peeled apples. That table had seen every part of me. Joy, fear, anger, tiredness, love. And now quiet strength. The envelope was still there. The house deed. My name. I traced it again, not out of hesitation, but reverence. It had taken me years to forget what it meant to own something fully. Not just on paper, but with heart. This house wasn't just in my name. It was in my blood. And now they wanted it. They'd never said it out loud, not in so many words. But over the past year, the signs were clear. Ethan's suggestion about a smaller place. Molly bringing a real estate brochure, just for fun. The way they both looked around my living room during their last visit. Eyes scanning like surveyors, not family. They saw square footage. I saw 50 years of living. That morning, as I sat with my tea, I made a quiet choice. I wasn't going to ask them for anything anymore. Not visits. Not phone calls. Not understanding. I had asked and waited and hoped for too long. No more shrinking. No more softening my voice, so they wouldn't feel guilty. No more pretending that being left out didn't hurt. I opened the small kitchen drawer where I kept my important things. Pulled out a notepad and a pen. Wrote a name, Mr. Harold Dempsey, the lawyer who helped Martin write his will all those years ago. He was older than me now, probably retired. But I'd find someone. I didn't need much. Just guidance. Just clarity. Because if they were going to make decisions about my life, my home, I needed to make sure my voice was still in the room. Even if I wasn't speaking. I made a list. Revisit the deed. Consult about trusts and rights. Update my will. Find out my options. It wasn't much. But it was something. And something is where strength starts. I changed out of my red sweater. Put on a clean blouse, my warmest coat, and boots that still held their shape. I stepped outside. The cold greeted me like an old friend. And I walked. To the mailbox first. Then to the little corner shop where Mrs. Calhoun always had a smile and stale biscotti. And I said hello like I always do. But this time, I didn't linger. I had calls to make. Back home, I pulled out the old address book. Pages worn soft, corners bent. Names crossed out with years. I found Mr. Dempsey's number. His office line still worked. A young voice answered, his daughter, now running the firm. She said they'd be glad to help. Said she remembered me. We made an appointment for the new year. Just after the holidays. I thanked her. Hung up the phone. And sat for a while breathing. Not heavy breaths. Not broken ones. But calm. Sure. Steady. That evening, I made a bowl of soup and watched the snow fall again. Same view. Same window. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping for headlights in the driveway. Or the jingle of keys in the door. I wasn't checking my phone. I was here. Not clinging to who they used to be. Not trying to rewind time. Just here. And in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Power. Not loud. Not flashy. But rooted. Because when you've given your whole heart to a family, and they leave you in silence, there comes a day when you decide the silence is yours now. Not theirs. That night, I folded the deed into a new envelope. Labeled it. Tucked it away with my papers. Then I walked to the back room and opened Martin's desk again. Not for the papers this time. But for the small photo taped inside the top drawer. It was us, young, smiling, standing in front of the house with paint on our clothes and hope in our eyes. I placed that photo on the kitchen shelf. A reminder. Not of what was lost. But of what was mine to keep. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Let me know in the comments. The snow had hardened by New Year's, crunching underfoot like brittle paper. Each step I took outside felt clearer, more deliberate, as though the ground itself understood that I wasn't walking just to pass the time anymore. I was walking to reclaim something. Inside the house, things stayed mostly the same. The same creaking floor, the same humming fridge, the same ticking clock above the mantel that hadn't worked since Martin passed. But something else, something unseen, had changed. Me. It wasn't a loud change. Not something anyone would notice right away. But in my bones I felt it. I wasn't waiting for someone else to notice what I needed. I was finally listening to myself. The appointment was set for January 4th. I spent the days leading up to it sorting through my file cabinet, fingers trailing over yellowed edges and old utility bills from decades past. I found Martin's will, the letter he wrote to me when we paid off the house, the deed itself, freshly photocopied and ready. Everything I needed. Everything that proved this life, this home, was something I'd built, and something I still held. I wore my best winter coat that day. Gray wool, buttons worn smooth by time. Martin had picked it out for me the year before he got sick. Said it made me look like someone who'd never take no for an answer. I walked into the law office with that coat wrapped around me like a shield. The receptionist, a kind girl named Emma, greeted me with a soft smile, and after a few moments, Mr. Dempsey's daughter, Caroline, led me into a room lined with books and framed degrees. She looked just like her father, calm eyes, hands that didn't rush. We talked for nearly an hour. She listened while I explained the slow unraveling. The way my children had grown distant. The comments. The absences. The suggestion to move somewhere smaller. The unsigned documents Ethan had left on my kitchen counter last year, asking if I'd just take a look. And when I placed the deed in front of her, she didn't hesitate. "You have every right to decide what happens with your home," she said. "And it sounds like you already have." I nodded, quiet but firm. "I don't want them to take it from me. Not by force, but by forgetting who I am." We made a plan. I would place the house into a trust, not for Ethan, not for Molly, but for preservation. My wish was for the house to remain a part of the community when I was gone, maybe a space for local gatherings, maybe even a small library or history center. Something warm. Something with memory in its bones. I'd update my will. Leave a note with it, too. Not a letter of blame, just truth. Something that said, "I gave everything I had. And when I was forgotten, I remembered myself." Caroline said it was a beautiful way to protect my life's work. She didn't use fancy words. She just said, "You're doing something brave." I don't know if it's brave, but it's necessary. I signed the papers. Watched as the ink dried, permanent, solid. Not out of anger, but out of peace. When I left the office, the sun was already low. That strange, late afternoon gold stretched long across the snowbanks, lighting the world in a kind of quiet forgiveness. I walked home slowly, clutching my bag like something sacred rested inside it. Back in the house, I set everything down on the dining room table. The same table where Christmas dinners once lived. The same table where, just a week ago, I sat alone beside cold cider and untouched gifts. This time, the table didn't feel empty. It felt strong. I made myself tea again. Sat in the chair closest to the window and watched the light fade from the sky. I didn't think about whether they'd visit in spring. I didn't wonder what excuse they'd make next. I just sat with my decision, and it sat with me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged here. Not because someone else said so. Not because I was holding on to a memory, but because I had reclaimed my space. This home isn't just a structure. It's my story, and I won't let it be erased by convenience or absence. That night, I cooked myself a small supper. Green beans, roasted potatoes, and a little pot roast I had tucked away in the freezer. Nothing fancy, but enough. Enough to say I matter. Enough to say, I'm still here. I pulled out the photo of Martin and me again. Set it on the kitchen windowsill. Let the house settle around me, familiar and kind. And I thought, this is how a reckoning begins. Not with fire, but with stillness. The past has a way of slipping in through quiet cracks. That night, as I folded the kitchen towel and turned off the last light, I felt a memory settle into the room beside me. Not loud, not sharp, just present. It was another winter night, many years ago. Before the gray in my hair. Before the silence in the house. I was 32. Ethan was 8. Molly was 5. Martin had just started on the night shift at the plant. Money was tight. Tighter than I ever let on. We had one car then, and it needed new brakes. I remember the mechanic handing me the estimate, his hands black with grease, and me nodding even though I knew we didn't have it. That evening, I sat on the bathroom floor while the kids took their baths, the checkbook open in my lap, my hand resting over the place where numbers didn't add up. I had a ring on my finger then, gold modest, with a small diamond Martin picked out himself before we were married. He called it his promise in a sparkle. I took it off that night, wrapped it in tissue, walked down to the local pawn shop the next morning while the kids were at school. It fetched just enough to fix the brakes, buy groceries, and leave a few dollars in the cookie jar for emergencies. Martin never knew, not because I couldn't tell him, but because I didn't want him to feel like he hadn't done enough. That was my quiet offering, my small sacrifice. I used to think, maybe someday, the kids would understand, that they'd see the ways I bent to keep everything whole. Not just the bills paid, but the birthdays remembered, the costumes sewn by hand, the lullabies hummed even on nights I hadn't slept. But they never asked. And I never told. Maybe that's where I went wrong, mistaking quiet love for visible love, believing that they would feel what I didn't say. I suppose some wounds don't bleed out loud. There was another moment, years later. Molly was 16. I had just come home from the hospital. A small surgery, nothing serious, but enough to leave me tired and sore. She was angry that night. Stormed in late, slammed her door. I had left a plate for her, lasagna, her favorite. It sat untouched. Later, I overheard her on the phone, telling her friend that I was so dramatic. That Mom acts like she's the only one who ever feels tired. I didn't say anything. Just lay there in the dark, one hand resting over the bandages on my stomach, and thought about how even pain, when quiet, can go unseen. It wasn't cruelty. Not then. Not now. Just distance. The kind that grows slowly, like frost creeping over a window pane. You don't notice it until the glass is too cold to touch. There were 100 moments like that. Moments when I stood in the kitchen, holding the weight of their lives with arms that were already tired. Moments when I wiped tears and faces and sticky counters without anyone asking if I needed a rest. Moments when I said, "I'm fine," because I believed that's what mothers were supposed to say. And maybe that's why now, all these years later, they think I don't need them, because I never showed them how much I did. But love doesn't erase the wound. It just teaches you how to carry it without limping. So when they left me here on Christmas Eve, when they chose other firesides, other trees, other laughter, it wasn't the first time I'd felt forgotten. It was just the first time I'd decided to stop making excuses for it. Because this silence didn't start with this holiday. It started the first time I smiled through disappointment. The first time I folded a letter I never sent. The first time I chose to give instead of ask. I gave them everything. And it didn't ruin me. But now, I will give something to myself. Not loud. Not out of spite. But out of understanding. Because sometimes the deepest wounds don't need bandages. They just need to be seen. And now finally, I see them. I see me. The girl who pawned her wedding ring for brake repairs. The woman who stitched costumes by hand. The mother who stood in doorways waiting for headlights. They're preparing for a future without me in it. So I'm preparing for a future where I don't wait for them to see me. It was the lowest moment, not because I had lost anything, but because I realized they didn't even see it as mine to begin with. After that letter, something inside me went still. Not broken. Not bitter. Just still. Like the hush that follows a long snowfall, when everything is covered in quiet, but the ground underneath is already deciding what to keep. I didn't mention the papers to Ethan. I didn't call Molly. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't empty me further. Instead, I did something they would never expect. I stopped trying. No more checking my phone, no more reminders sent about birthdays or old family recipes. No more just checking in texts. No more soft invitations or second chances. I stopped setting extra plates. I stopped freezing leftovers, just in case. And in that space, something strange happened. I didn't fall apart. I rose. Slowly. Quietly. Gently. I started waking up without dread. I opened the windows, even when it was cold. Let the air in. Let the dust settle. Let the truth sit where it needed to. And I started moving differently in my own home. I cleared out the hallway closet, donating coats that hadn't been worn since the grandkids were small enough to think hugs were magic. I put away the box of toys, not out of grief, but because I no longer needed to prove I was waiting. I wasn't. The house, in turn, began to breathe again. The silence that used to ache now felt restful. The empty rooms no longer echoed with absence. They hummed with ownership. I rearranged the furniture in the living room. Moved Martin's old recliner to the sunniest corner. Hung my own quilting above the fireplace. I made the space mine. Not because I was reclaiming it from them, but because I was finally offering it to myself. At the grocery store, I started shopping for one loaf of bread. One small jug of milk. One apple pie instead of two. And it felt right. Not lonely. Not sad. Just honest. One day at the post office, Mrs. Boone from church asked if I'd be at the next senior luncheon. I almost said I had other plans. The way I always did, holding out hope for a family visit that never came. But instead I smiled and said, I'd love to. I brought lemon bars and wore a brooch I hadn't touched since Martin's funeral. We played bingo and laughed until my cheeks hurt. No one asked about my kids. And I didn't offer. Because that afternoon, for the first time in years, I wasn't just someone's mother. I was someone. There was power in the quiet. In letting go of what wouldn't hold me. In not explaining myself anymore. I stopped talking about the house. Who might inherit it, what they wanted to do with it, what they'd say if they found out it wasn't theirs to claim. Let them wonder. Let them call when it's convenient. Let them bring casseroles on Easter if they remember. I would be here. Not waiting. Not bitter. Just here. Whole. I started walking again, just to walk, not to pass time. Down the old road by the creek, where the trees bent like old friends. The same path Martin and I used to take on quiet Sunday mornings. I brought a thermos of tea and a small sandwich. Sat on the bench by the bend in the trail. Birds flew overhead, and the breeze carried no apology. I thought, maybe this is what freedom feels like. Not loud, not sudden, but earned in stillness. There was no grand announcement. No dramatic goodbye. Just small choices, every day, to stop reaching for hands that wouldn't reach back. And I knew deep in my chest that when the time came, they would ask why I didn't say something sooner. Why I didn't tell them I was hurt. Why I didn't yell, or cry, or demand more. But they'll never understand that silence is not weakness. Silence is knowing your voice no longer needs to beg. That's the shift. Not in them. In me. I no longer needed them to remember who I was. I remembered. And I would never forget again. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The kind of day where the sky is the color of dishwater, and the air smells like damp wool. I'd been sweeping the front porch. Not because it needed it, but because some part of me still liked the rhythm of care. That's when I heard the footsteps. Quick, uncertain. Then a knock. I opened the door. And there she was, the youngest of Molly's three. Ellie. 14 now, taller than I remembered. Her brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail, cheeks red from the cold. She held a paper bag in one hand, and an envelope in the other. Hi, Grandma, she said almost shyly. Mom said to drop this off. She handed me the envelope, another typed letter, likely another gentle push to sign something. But before I could respond, she held up the bag. I made cinnamon cookies, she said. Like yours. Kinda. I blinked. And smiled. Well, I said, stepping aside. I better be the judge of that. She walked in, cautious at first, like she wasn't sure if the air in the house would still welcome her. I set the bag on the kitchen table, opened it slowly. The scent filled the room like memory. Sugar, cinnamon, something a little too burnt, but sweet nonetheless. She sat across from me, hands folded in her lap. She glanced around, eyes lingering on the mantel, the photo of Martin, the tree I still hadn't taken down. It smells the same in here, she said. Like Christmas and you. I laughed softly. Is that a good thing? She nodded quickly. Yeah. I missed it. I poured us each a glass of milk and we tasted the cookies, slightly overbaked but made with effort. Made with something real. We sat in silence for a bit, crumbs between us, the kind that didn't need sweeping. She glanced at the photo on the windowsill, the one of Martin and me standing in front of the house. I never noticed how much Mom looks like you, she said. I didn't reply, just smiled. Then, without warning, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small frame. Inside was a photo I hadn't seen in years. It was me, holding her as a baby, both of us wrapped in a quilt I'd sewn that winter. her tiny hand gripping my necklace. My smile tired, but full. Found it in an old box, she said. I thought maybe you'd want it. I took the frame carefully, eyes stinging. Thank you, sweetheart, I whispered. She looked down. I don't know why they don't come see you. I think it's stupid. I said nothing, because I knew she wasn't looking for answers, only honesty. So I reached across the table, placed my hand gently over hers. It's all right, I said. Sometimes people forget where they come from. But you didn't. She stayed for another hour. We talked about school, her art, the way she liked to sit by the window and draw the maple tree in her backyard. I listened, really listened, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt alive in a new way, not with noise but with connection. Before she left, she hugged me tight. Longer than I expected. Like she knew I needed it, even if I hadn't asked. After she left, I sat by the window with the framed photo in my lap. And I realized that was my dignity. Right there in my hands. Not a document. Not a title. But a moment of being seen. Not as a burden. Not as a task. But as a person. She had remembered what they had forgotten. That I mattered. That I still carried warmth. Still offered something real. That evening, I placed the new photo beside the one of Martin and me. 2 anchors. One from a life I'd built. One from a life still unfolding. And I whispered a quiet prayer. Thank you. For letting me be seen, just once more. The strength I'd been building, the stillness, the resolve, it all settled deeper. Not with anger, but with clarity. I no longer needed their recognition to prove my worth. But her visit, her face, her cookies, her memory, reminded me that I hadn't disappeared. Not completely. And even if it was just one person, one granddaughter, that was enough. Enough to keep going. Enough to keep standing. Enough to keep choosing myself. That night, I took the envelope she'd delivered, the one with their plans, their assumptions, and placed it in a box with the others. But not out of fear. Out of grace. Because now I knew something I hadn't before. Even in their forgetting, I hadn't been forgotten. Have you ever found strength in moments of silence? Let me know. The thaw came late that year. It had been a long winter. The kind that lingered in the bones, in the corners of the house, in the heart. But come March, the snow softened. Icicles dripped in steady rhythm from the eaves, and little rivers of meltwater trickled down the driveway. I was sitting in the living room, knitting a shawl with soft, golden yarn, something warm for spring, when I heard the knock. Not hurried. Not angry. Just uncertain. I opened the door and found Ethan standing there, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, eyes flicking between me and the porch beneath his feet. Hey Mom, he said, offering a half smile. You got a minute? I nodded and stepped aside. He didn't sit at first. Just stood, scanning the room like a stranger stepping into someone else's memories. House looks good, he said. Smells like cinnamon. Like always. I motioned toward the chair by the fire. You can sit if you like. He sat slowly, almost cautiously. I returned to my chair across from him, picked up my yarn, and let the silence stretch a little. Finally, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. I got a copy of the trust paperwork you filed, he said. Caroline Dempsey sent it over. I nodded, eyes steady. Good. Then you know. He looked at me, not with anger, but something heavier. Something that looked a lot like guilt. I guess I didn't think you'd go that far. I rested my hands in my lap. Far. You didn't even talk to us about it. Me or Molly. I took a breath, slow, measured. And you didn't talk to me when you had those papers drawn up with my name on the top, but not at the bottom. He opened his mouth, closed it again. I continued. You planned my future without asking me if I wanted one. You looked at this house like a piece of inheritance. I looked at it and saw my life. He rubbed his eyes, suddenly looking older than he had before. It wasn't meant to hurt you, he said. We were just trying to prepare. Make things easier. Easier for who? I asked gently. He didn't answer. The fire crackled softly between us, the sound small but full. Like the house itself had something to say. I didn't do this to spite you, I said, keeping my voice calm. I did it because I needed to make sure I wouldn't be erased. He sat with that for a while. Let it settle. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Molly's upset, he said. She thinks you're punishing us. I shook my head slowly. No. If I were punishing you, I'd have left the house to someone you didn't know. Or sold it out from under you. But I didn't. Then why the trust? Because I wanted to make a choice before someone else did. He looked up at me then, and for the first time in years, I saw my son, not the man who came with contracts and clipped explanations, but the boy who once cried over a scraped knee and asked if I could fix it. And I saw something else too. The slow, creeping shadow of consequence. Not revenge. Not punishment. But reality. He had thought I would always be there, smiling gently from behind the pie, handing over my life one bite at a time. He didn't realize there would come a day when I stopped offering the plate. Ellie came by, I said. Brought cookies. A picture of me holding her when she was a baby. He looked surprised. She didn't tell us. No, I said. She didn't need to. He was quiet again. I think, he said finally, we forgot how much you still hold. My eyes softened. Yes, you did. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't say it's okay. Because it wasn't. But I did say, thank you. Because sorry, real sorry, deserves to be heard, even if it comes too late to change the past. He stood then, hands still in his pockets, but eyes steadier. I'll tell Molly, he said. She might need time. So did I replied. He nodded again, turned toward the door, then paused. I know we don't deserve it, he said quietly, but if there's still space at the table this Easter. There's always space, I said. But I'm not the one who sets the places anymore. You'll have to come early and help. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He left, and I sat alone in the quiet. Not heavy this time. Just full. Because they were starting to see. Starting to feel what they had overlooked. And I didn't need to yell, or threaten, or make them pay. All I did was stop waiting. And in that stillness, the reckoning unfolded. Softly. But surely. It was 2 weeks before Easter when Molly came. I saw her car pull up from the kitchen window, shiny and new. The kind that says things without speaking. She sat inside for a few minutes, unmoving, staring at the house like it held a story she wasn't sure she remembered right. Then the door opened, and she stepped out. She wasn't carrying anything. Not a pie, not a bouquet, not even a purse. Just her. I opened the door before she knocked. We stood there, mother and daughter, on the same porch where I once held her hand as she took her first steps. Where she waited for the school bus with her backpack bouncing against her spine. Where she kissed Martin's cheek for the last time and whispered, "Goodbye, Daddy." Now years later, she stood looking at me like I was someone new. Or maybe someone she hadn't really seen in a very long time. "Hi, Mom," she said. I nodded. "Come in." She stepped inside slowly. Looked around like she was taking inventory, not of the furniture, but of what remained of us. She didn't sit. "I didn't come to fight," she said. I needed to understand. I gestured toward the chair. "Sit. There's nothing here worth fighting about." She sat down, hands clasped in her lap. Her eyes wandered the room, to the mantel, to the framed photo of Ellie and me, to the knitting on the side table. "This place still smells like you," she said softly. I smiled faintly. "Well, I've been here." Her eyes dropped. "I know." She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A copy of the trust documents, probably. She set it on the table between us, not as a weapon, but as a question. "I didn't know you were feeling like this," she said. "We thought we were helping." I nodded slowly. "I know that's what you told yourselves." She flinched just a little. "I was scared," she said. "I thought, if something happened to you, we'd be left trying to untangle everything. I didn't mean to make you feel erased." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the wood creak beneath me like an old friend sighing. "But that's what you did, Molly. You made plans around me. Over me. As if my hands hadn't built this place. As if I were already gone." She looked down, throat tightening. "We thought you were fine. You always say you're fine." "That's because no one listens when I say I'm not." She blinked. Her mouth trembled, just a little. "We didn't think." "No, sweetheart," I interrupted, Gently but firmly. You didn't. She looked at me then, really looked. And I continued, soft and slow. I cooked for holidays where no one came. I wrapped gifts that never left my living room. I watched the windows for headlights that never turned into the driveway. And you want to know what hurt most? It wasn't the loneliness. It was realizing that you didn't even notice it was happening. Her hands trembled in her lap. You were so busy preparing for the day I wouldn't be here, I said, that you stopped showing up while I still was. We sat in silence after that. Not cold, not cruel. Just full. Then I picked up the paper she had laid on the table. I didn't do this to punish you, I said. I did this to protect myself. To remind you, and maybe to remind me, that I am still here. And I still get to choose what happens to the life I built. Her eyes glistened. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't realize how far we'd gone. I nodded. Neither did I. Until I was sitting at this table on Christmas Eve, and the only sound in this house was my own breathing. She reached forward, hesitated, then placed her hand gently over mine. I miss the pie, she said with a watery smile. And the cards. And the way your tree always tilted to the left. I smiled back. The tree still tilts. I just don't fix it anymore. We laughed softly. The kind of laugh that comes not from humor, but from relief. That something broken might be mended. I can't change what we did, she said. But I'd like to try. If you'll let me. I will, I said, voice warm but steady. But I'm not going to be the one carrying the whole table anymore. If you want to come back, bring a chair. Bring a dish. Bring your hands and your time. She nodded, tears slipping quietly down her cheek. I will, she whispered. I promise. We sat like that for a long while. Two women with the same eyes, the same soft stubbornness, holding on to what still remained. And I knew deep down that it wouldn't be perfect. There'd be more distance, more silence. But now there were boundaries. Not fences. Just lines drawn in love. She stood to go. And before stepping out the door, she turned. Will you come for Easter? She asked. I shook my head gently. Not this year. But you're welcome here, if you'd like to come home. She nodded, smiled, and left. And I sat in the quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like dignity. It felt like peace. Spring came in slow waves that year. Not with a flourish, but with soft steps, like a hesitant child peeking into a room to see if it's safe. The daffodils were first, pushing through the thawed earth by the fence. Little bursts of yellow, fragile and brave. I used to plant them with Martin every March. He'd grumble about the dirt under his nails, but he loved seeing them bloom. I brought out the old broom and swept the porch again. Not because it needed it, but because it always felt like a way of preparing the house to breathe. The windows stayed open more often now. The light came in differently. Not with longing, but with invitation. I made a habit of sitting by the kitchen window in the mornings, sipping tea, letting the air touch my skin. No radio, no background noise. Just the rhythm of life moving forward. Birds nesting, wind through the maple, the creak of wood settling into its own age. I didn't expect a flood of calls. Didn't expect Molly to come every weekend, or Ethan to show up with flowers. But slowly things shifted. Molly sent a letter after Easter. Handwritten. Said she'd spent the morning baking, and that for the first time, the kitchen felt a little like mine. Said Ellie asked if they could start making cinnamon cookies together. Said she understood now. That presence matters more than legacy. Ethan called in April. He didn't ask for anything. Just told me about a story he read in the paper. Asked if I was planting this year. Said he missed the smell of tomato leaves on his fingers. I told him I was taking a break from tomatoes, trying green beans instead. He said, that sounds like you. I didn't know what he meant, but it felt kind. I started going to the senior center more regularly, joined a quilting circle that meets every Wednesday. We sit around a long table, hands busy, stories flowing. We talk about our kids, our aches, the things we remember, and the things we try to forget. No one there asks what your children do. They ask if you've eaten. If you're warm enough. If you need a ride home. That's the kind of love I've grown to trust. The kind that shows up with casseroles and quiet company, not with expectations. One afternoon, I brought my apple pie to the library for their bake sale. A little girl with red glasses took a bite and said, "This tastes like a hug." And for the first time in a long time, I felt full without needing anyone to say my name. The house, too, seemed to settle into this new season. I stopped closing the guest room door. Not out of hope, but out of peace. If they came, they'd be welcome. If they didn't, the bed would still be made, the window still open to spring. I started writing again, small notes, journal entries. Nothing grand. Just pieces of myself, stitched together like a quilt no one asked for but needed anyway. Sometimes I wrote about Martin. About the way his laugh filled a room. The way he used to hold my hand like it was the last precious thing on earth. Sometimes I wrote about the ache. The betrayal. The slow realization that being needed isn't the same as being loved. And sometimes I wrote about healing. Not the kind that comes with closure or apology. The kind that grows quietly in the garden, unnoticed at first, until one day, you realize something green has taken root where the wound used to be. This was my spring. Not loud. Not full of reunions or dramatic confessions. But real. I planted green beans. Hung fresh laundry on the line. Read books until the sun dipped low behind the trees. And the house? It stayed warm. Not because someone returned, but because I did. Not to who I was, but to who I had become. A woman who gave. A woman who hurt. And a woman who stood up from the table and said, quietly, "This is mine. I choose it." Now I sit on the porch most evenings. Just me, a cup of tea, and the sound of wind slipping through the trees. The maple still stands tall in the front yard, though it leans a little more to the left these days. I think I lean too in my own way. Not from weakness, but from wisdom. From years of bending, giving, waiting. I used to think love meant staying silent. Keeping the peace. Making room. Even when there was none left for me. But now I know different. Love, real love, makes space for you to be seen. To be heard. To belong, not just in memory, but in presence. And if they come back, truly come back, they'll find the door still open. Not because I'm waiting, but because I no longer need to prove I'm worth walking toward. I am not a burden. I am not a placeholder for holidays and hand-me-downs. I am a woman who held a home together with thread and prayer. Who chose silence, and then chose herself. I don't regret loving them. But I do regret how long it took me to love me. And maybe that's the lesson I leave behind. Not in deeds or documents. Not in heirlooms or recipes. But in the quiet power of reclaiming what was always mine. So if you're reading this, sitting in your own quiet room, wondering if you still matter, let me say this. You do. You are not forgotten. You are not small. And you don't need their recognition to stand tall. Take up space. Say what you mean. And when they stop showing up, show up for yourself. Every time. If you've ever felt unseen or forgotten, remember. Your worth doesn't depend on their understanding. Share your story in the comments.